Senator, you are demanding that the Prime Minister of Japan release Navy Lieutenant Ridge Alkonis from a Japanese prison and allow him to return to U.S. soil. You gave a deadline of midnight on February 28th of this year. What's the significance of that date?
There is no mathematical formula by which I achieved that. I just decided a few weeks ago, started referring to it a few weeks ago informally, but I wanted to make it very clear more recently that enough time has elapsed. Look, Lieutenant Alkonis has been in prison since July. We've been working ever since then to get him out. And Prime Minister Kishida, during his recent visit to the United States, his chat with President Biden at the White House, discussed this issue with President Biden. And apparently, the two agreed moving forward that they would take steps to look into what can be done about this case. And I think it's important that rather than just let this case languish and rather than just allow this moment to be forgotten, I think it's important that Japan realize that they've got a very good deal going. For a very long time, no one in the United States has talked about the fact that we have 55,000 U.S. military personnel deployed to and stationed in Japan to protect Japan. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of U.S. sweat, blood, and tears on the line in order to protect Japan. Now, I understand sometimes U.S. military personnel commit crimes there. There are several Americans in prison there. The other Americans who were in prison in Japan, who were in prison for something they did while serving in Japan, they committed crimes that we would recognize as legitimate, imprisonable offenses in the United States, typically violent crime. Lieutenant Alkonis didn't do any of these things. No, he's in prison because of a car accident that was caused by a medical emergency, one that he had no ability to foresee or protect or prevent. And as a result of this, and as a result of the fact that two Japanese nationals tragically died, and my heart goes out to the family members of those victims, but it was an accident nonetheless, one caused by an unforeseeable medical emergency. You don't imprison someone for that. Apparently they do in Japan sometimes, although even in Japan, while their laws are stricter, I'm told that it is highly unusual, whereas here the person involved in the accident, responsible for the accident, in that he was driving the car, where that person goes and, pursuant to an ancient Japanese custom known as gomenasai, offers up a sort of informal settlement of sorts. In this instance, he paid out $1.65 million to the family members of the victims of that car accident. The family received those things. In that set of circumstances, a Japanese national will almost never go to prison, where the gomenasai offer is made and accepted by the family. But in this instance, they sent him to prison for 3 years, which is about as much time as they could send him away for. Not in the United States, not in any other civilized country that I'm aware of would somebody go to prison. But it's more than that here. If they're going to insist on him being in prison, they should at least be willing to say, okay, we'll at least send him back to the United States, transfer him back to the United States, remand him to the custody of the U.S. military, who can then decide what to do with him and to serve out whatever portion of his sentence the U.S. decides to keep him locked up for. He shouldn't have to languish in a Japanese prison for something that wouldn't even send him to prison in the United States. We just want him back on U.S. soil. Just send him back to the United States, let him finish his sentence here.
Senator, up until now, you've remained relatively quiet regarding your frustration with the Prime Minister. In a @based Mike Lee Twitter thread, you said your approach is about to change. What does that change look like, and what are you prepared to do if February 28th comes and goes without Lieutenant Alkonis' return to U.S. soil?
My point is this. Look, he's been in prison since July, but we've known about that. I learned about this case back in May of 2021. so well over a year and a half. During that entire time period, I've been trying to figure out a way to work this out, so that we don't have to take this U.S. Navy lieutenant. Lieutenant Ridge Alkonis is one of our best and brightest in the U.S. military. He's a devoted husband and father of 3 young children, and he's been imprisoned wrongfully, I think, especially when you consider how they're treating him compared to how they would treat someone in an identical circumstance if he were a Japanese national. At a bare minimum, they need to send him back here. In all of that advocacy during that entire time period, I have been restrained and deferential, understanding that, catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. It's better to move people along gently and carefully and cautiously, lest you upset feelings in the process. But there does come a limit to that. And I have carefully avoided talking in detail about what I think we might want to do differently in the event that they don't accommodate our request to send Ridge Alkonis promptly back to the United States. Just as Japan has gotten off very light. And we haven't had a significant discussion in this country in a very long time about why it is that we have 55,000 U.S. military personnel stationed there, and all the expense that goes along with that, all the sacrifice for U.S. military families that involves. So you bet, if my patience is almost at its limit, if we get to the end of this month and they still haven't returned them to the United States, I'm going to be a lot more inclined to have that conversation and to have it with great frankness and openness. The Japanese government might not find that a comfortable exercise because really they have a good thing going. We are providing for their security with those 55,000 Americans.
Senator, in that same Twitter thread, @BasedMikeLee, you tweeted a message using Japanese characters. What was that message?
Okay, so I've been doing some research into Japanese expressions, trying to find one that fits in certain circumstance. The expression I used there, it's sort of analogous to the squeaky wheel gets the oil, but not in a good way, not in a way that the wheel wants to receive the oil. If the squeaky wheel didn't want to receive the oil, it's more like that. In other words, my point was that by imprisoning one of our best and our brightest that the U.S. military has to offer, who's there to protect Japan, they've drawn attention to the very special relationship that the two countries have, but also to the fact that Japan is the net beneficiary of this relationship. We both benefit, to be sure, but this is a really good deal for them. And think about it, Lee. We've got 55,000 U.S. military personnel stationed there. That's in addition, that's not even counting their families, but 55,000 U.S. military personnel stationed in Japan to protect Japan. What that means to me, and the reason I use that expression there, is that by taking one of our best and brightest, throwing him in prison for 3 years, and then ignoring to this point our repeated requests to transfer him back to the custody of the United States of America, they're drawing attention to that relationship. And if they want to draw attention to it, they might not like where that leads. Because once people start to talk more about the fact that this is a little bit lopsided, especially with the way they're treating our people, or this person, this family in particular, they might not like the outcome. It's better that they solve this up front. And I hope they will do so and bring him back, have him back on U.S. soil by the end of the day on February 28th.
Lastly, Senator, you've been instrumental in clearing a number of hurdles thus far. You have been prolific in your support of Lieutenant Alkonis and his family, including traveling to Japan to be with Ridge during his incarceration. You have an open and direct line of communication with Mrs. Brittany Alkonis, other members of the family and their support team. Why is Senator Mike Lee so committed to this case? Because this is outrageous. When I first heard about this case over a year and a half ago, I thought this can't possibly be true. They've got to be missing something. And so if nothing else, out of curiosity and out of a desire to not believe, I didn't
want to believe that Japan would do something like that to someone who hadn't done anything criminally culpable. But the more I looked into it, the more I couldn't reach the conclusion that this was anything but unjust. And I thought all along, surely they will listen, surely they will see that this isn't in their interest. And I've been gentle in the way I've gone about it. I went over to Japan. I visited Lieutenant Alkonis multiple times in prison, met with Japanese officials to discuss the case. And the more time that's elapsed with this, the more I become convinced this is a grave injustice. And this guy and his family, they've suffered a lot of injustices through this process. It was very difficult for a long period of time. We weren't even sure whether he was going to continue getting paid. The military informed him that effective December 28th, he would stop receiving his pay and benefits, which would be devastating for his wife and their 3 young children, who would have been forced at that point to return to the United States and not being able to see him. The Japanese government won't let them communicate by phone, so talking to him would be impossible, but they wouldn't have been able to afford to live there without his pay and benefits and status. And so we had to, fortunately, we were able to get legislation that I drafted, folded into another bill that was set to be passed, and we got it passed into law without a single vote in opposition. So they've gone through this trauma, and this was completed only days before his pay and benefits were set to expire. The Department of Defense had sat on their request for months to extend it, to grant an exception. And then just a few short weeks before the pay and benefits were set to expire, they notified us, oh, by the way, we're not going to grant your exception, hence the need for the last-minute scramble at the end. Fortunately, we got that taken care of. These guys have suffered, and it makes me sad that they're in that position, especially because they're in that position because Lieutenant Reg Alkonis was willing to stand up, stand in the breach, and serve the United States of America. He's there to protect us, to make us safer, and to make Japan safer at the same time. And it's a tragedy in my mind that the country where he's serving, the country that is benefiting from his expertise and his hard work and his willingness to live thousands of miles away from his own home, is treating him like this. It's got to end.
Senator Michael Lee, thank you.
Thank you.